Good afternoon. It's emerged that the Royal Bank of Scotland sacked 4 of its traders between the end of last year and February this year over allegations they tried to fix a key banking interest rate. RBS has confirmed it's under investigation for manipulating the rate known as LIBOR, which banks use to lend money to each other. Last week, Barclays was fined nearly £300 million by the UK and US banking authorities for trying to rig the rate. Let's speak now to Chris Roebuck from the Cass Business School in London, who previously worked in senior roles with banks UBS and HSBC. We thought that other banks were implicated. Yep. How do you think RBS has handled this when you compare with what Barclays has done?
Well, RBS has decided that a group of people have gone over the line, and as a result of that, they have to leave the organisation. And that's what you would expect from a bank that requires people to stick to the rules and that there are penalties for not doing so. Now, this is about reputational risk. The bank cannot afford to have other customers worried about what's happening in other parts of the banks, because, to be perfectly blunt, some of the major global banks got hit more effectively by customers taking their money out from investments because they were worried about the behaviour of investment banks than actually caused other problems.
This story, though, does appear to be more complicated than perhaps has been thought. Reports today are suggesting that Barclays believed it had the tacit approval, or in fact explicit approval from the Bank of England that it was doing this.
Well, this is where it all gets very, very blurred. We had sort of 14 banks who were involved in setting this interest rate. We had a number of people who were thinking, well, maybe we can manipulate this for the benefit of our bank. We had an overall market where people were expecting things to go in a certain direction. So even if there was not complicity, there was perhaps an acceptance that some of these things might be happening underneath the surface, but we didn't want to investigate too far unless we found they were.
Doesn't it go further than that? I mean, some people are saying that there was a phone call between Paul Tucker, Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, and Bob Diamond, and these two men have very different recollections of the conclusion of that phone call.
Well, as we have seen from the Levinson inquiry, people have very different recollections about what happened in the real world. I think what needs to happen is the government's inquiry into this particular issue is critically important to find out what happened. But certainly we will see other banks that are involved in this in some way, shape or form, and let's be fair, they're not just going to be British banks, they're going to be global banks. And what has to happen is that the banks concerned need to make sure that A, the people who did this are effectively dismissed, and B, that there is a clear indication from the chief executive and the board to everybody else in the bank that in future any unethical behaviour will not be tolerated.
In the States, there seem to be many more prosecutions for financial malfeasance than here. Is there an argument for bringing criminal prosecutions against traders who are being found guilty of this?
Well, the question is, I'm not an expert in terms of the legal aspects of whether this is a criminal offence or not, and I think that has to be dealt with.
Well, I don't think it is a criminal offence.
And I think that's correct.
Lord Turner this morning was suggesting it wasn't. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a question there about whether you extend what is a criminal offence in this particular area. That's a question for the government. But in the final analysis, we come back to the point where you cannot regulate to make people act with integrity and treat customers right. That's a cultural thing, and that has to come from the top of the bank. The regulation is there to catch people who are doing things wrong so that they are punished and things don't get out of hand. But in the beginning of the story, banks are there to service customers, to service the economy, and they have to deal with integrity to do that.
Is it too much, though, to suggest that this is thanks to a growing Americanization, a growing marketization of the banks as well, where perhaps in America, if it's not exactly illegal, you get away with it or you push it?
Certainly the American banks take a much more laissez-faire approach to we have to do the business, we have to make the money, and that's driven out across the world in terms of global banking. I think one of the other factors is, and let's remember this is only a very, very small group of people in the investment banks, and there's hundreds of thousands of other people who are working with integrity in banks, and what's happened with those people is since the deregulation of the city there has been a smaller amount of contact with real people. They're dealing with figures, they're dealing with markets, it's almost become a computer game for some people, and as far as that's concerned they think this is just part of the game. But that has to stop, because they have to be given the clear impression that this is not just a game, this still counts as part of banking, and just as those in retail banking expect to be ethical in their behaviour, those in private banking do the same, those in this part of investment banking have to be ethical as well.
Okay, Chris Roebuck from the Cass Business School, thank you very much.